professor of history at the American University. He joins us now live from Washington, D.C. Anton, good to have you on the show. So Igor Girkin, you could say, is an insider, an important person. We're seeing a growing number of Kremlin allies, insiders, begin to raise their voice, and their voice is starting to become louder. I mean, what are your thoughts on this and the effect that it might have on President Putin?
John, listen, the voices that have been critical of the Russian military campaign have always been there, and what just happened in Makiivka has simply increased the volume of criticism. But I think it's very important to understand that this criticism, including from Girkin and the blogger that you mentioned, that your report mentioned, this criticism is coming from the war party. This is not criticism that asks for the end of the special military operation, as Moscow calls this. This is criticism that is asking for a more robust and a more rapid military operation into Ukraine to get this over with quickly, but in a much more deadly fashion. So I imagine that the Kremlin is going to have to sort of try to restrain these guys, because they are chafing at the bit to expand this war more than the Kremlin seems to want to do at this point.
So where does this leave President Putin? I mean, you said that the Russians are expecting a more swift outcome in Ukraine. What can President Putin do?
I think the Kremlin is going to hold the line, which is to slowly build up its forces by introducing the soldiers that have been mobilized from the military reserve, training them, slowly integrating them into the current units, and then continuing to push very slowly and methodically, but at a as little loss for Russian soldiers in the field as possible. So I think for the Kremlin, this is an unfortunate, certainly a tragic setback. But I have to be honest with you, as much of a victory as this is tactically for Ukraine, I doubt that this attack, even with the body count increasing in the next few days as people are dug out from under the rubble, I don't think that, unfortunately for Ukraine, this is going to translate itself into any kind of strategic victory or a change of the balance of power in the field.
Anton, here's the problem that I see with your reference to the newly mobilized troops. Because they are new recruits, they're not necessarily believers, they're not professional soldiers. I mean, and as the blogger was pointing out, do you feel that there's a failure on the Russian leadership side, whether it's President Putin or the military generals, to actually motivate these troops? Because it seems, according to the blogger, that the army really doesn't believe or understand or believe what they are fighting for.
So the folks that are coming onto the battlefield are not recruits. They're mobilized reserve soldiers. All of them have had a military background. That does not account for the morale, which, according to a lot of Western reports and bloggers critical of how slowly this campaign is going, is certainly an argument that's been made on many occasions. Nonetheless, the Russians are holding the line against the Ukrainians. And unfortunately, with both sides dug in, morale issues being a big difference between the Ukrainians, who certainly are defending their territory, and the Russians, who are lagging in morale compared to the Ukrainians, I don't see a very simple solution to this, because the Russians simply have more men now in the field, and certainly more of an economic base from which to supply their army. So I think we're looking at many more months of this war of attrition. And unfortunately for the Ukrainians, the Russians have more fat to burn.
You make a comparison. Let me make my comparison. 6 months ago, Russia seemed to have the upper hand in this conflict. The situation has undoubtedly changed dramatically, in fact, with Russia sort of slipping. How likely is it that you think that they'll be more inclined to honestly come to a negotiating table for some sort of deal?
So, look, the Russians have been ready for negotiations, just not from a position of a country that has lost a war, which, of course, is what the Ukrainians understandably expect. It's the Ukrainian side lately that has repeatedly refused to negotiate until it liberates its territory back within its 1991 borders, which means retaking of Crimea. So, despite the setbacks that the Russians have suffered, including, of course, the massive amounts of territory that they gave up in the north, in the Kharkov province, and in the south around Kherson, they still hold an enormous amount of Ukrainian territory. And so, again, they don't seem to be operating on a schedule or even much of a calendar. They're in this for the long haul, as are the Ukrainians. So, again, the grim realist in me says that we'll be talking about this for months to come, unfortunately.
Okay. Anton Fedyashin, thank you very much for joining us here on the NewsHour. I do appreciate hearing your analysis. Thank you.